Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you, Boštjan and colleagues, for inviting me to your conference. I'm very honored to have a chance to talk to you. So my presentation will concern forestry, as it is becoming increasingly important in European Green Deal. You see that the forestry sector is really expected to deliver a lot, and my presentation will address the forestry sector in terms of whether it would help or not meeting the expectations in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And I will show you the situation as it is now in Central Europe. So hopefully it this one, yes. So this is my agenda for the talk. I will first rehearse what Lotta has already said a little bit about how EU greenhouse gas emission reduction targets become more and more tight during the time. Then show you some concrete examples of current greenhouse gas emission development, the trends in terms of total emissions and LULUCF sector contribution. We'll show you the contribution of forestry specifically and go to situation in the Czech Republic currently, comparing it with the development of other Central European states, including Slovenia, and conclude with forestry priorities today and make some brief summary on that. So, about one slide about the European greenhouse gas policy and forestry and land use change and forestry sector in it. So for the coming years, coming 5 years, the commitment is to have climate neutral LULUCF sector when discounted using forest reference level. That's, I don't know if you are aware about the accounting system. It simply says that you don't use zero line, but forest reference levels is simply a line most commonly below reference level, making the, let's say, offsets from forestry more difficult to reach, because it's aimed at really additional effort made in forestry rather than taking the, let's say, expected strength of the forests in the country. So that's why forest reference level. My personal opinion, forest reference level was set, very unfortunately, it's a system based on modeling. It was shown to be very difficult and, in my opinion, unfair for a lot of states. So that has been realized at EU level too, and for the next 5 years, 2026, 2030, there will be a new accounting system and new commitment. For the commitment in this period, there is a commitment to have climate neutral sector after a reference level set on so-called not modeling but recent emission inventory averages that have been reported by individual countries, which is much more simple and fair, I would say. And also the commitment made to the LULUCF sector is that they should have the sector should offset 3,010 megatons CO2 equivalent by 2030. You see that the commitment increased successively during the time. So this is the currently proposed target for the LULUCF sector. And finally, from 2031 onwards, the commitment is to have a climate neutral land sector by 2035, and by land sector is meant to have agriculture, which is mainly sector dealing with livestock management, and LULUCF sector accounted jointly as one land use sector. So that sector, both agriculture and LULUCF, should be climate neutral. That is, it should have zero emissions or sinks. So I took the latest submissions of national inventories and made this graph for you. Here I grouped the emissions so that in green color, starting with green color, you have LULUCF sector, which is expectedly going to negative values, so it's offsetting part of the emissions. Then there is agriculture, which is the part that should be merged with LULUCF up to 2030 to form one land sector, and that's the green, light green part here. And then all other sectors, mostly energy, but the other sectors together, this is the red part of the bars. So when you sum up the total, that's the black line, that's the total, and it's just below that bar level, because that's the offset of LULUCF included. So this is the total for LULUCF, and when you compare it to 1990, which is the reference year for which the commitment is made, we are currently 36% below the 1990 level. And the commitment for 2030 is having 55%. And when we look on what LULUCF is doing during recent years, it's going in unfavorable direction, I would say. It's not really seen on that scale, so let's look on this picture, which shows only LULUCF sector, not the entire emissions, but only LULUCF sector, and LULUCF sector includes forest land, that's green bars, and then with the brownish color, it's part of harvested wood products, which also used to offset emissions, so it helps to increase the sink, I would say, in the sector. And by the yellow color, it's labeled other land use categories: cropland, grassland, settlements, wetlands. So altogether, when you sum up again, the black line shows you the total LULUCF value. So when we again look on the quantities itself, so we are at minus 223 megatons currently, the last year, and the commitment for 2030 is to offset minus 310 megatons of CO2 equivalent. So, and the recent trend of LULUCF sector is going this direction. So you may see it will be pretty challenging to arrive at minus 310 megatons in 2030, because we are not heading that direction. We are going somewhere else. You know, when you follow forestry sector in general, you often hear rather unpleasant and terrifying stories about what's going on in terms of drought and in terms of fires. So this is just a couple of headlines that I collected from just recent 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the reports about, you know, situation in United States or in tropical countries. So you have just the very fresh evidence of very negative development in terms of forests and their, let's say, ability to offset carbon dioxide. And when we speak about European space, you know, already in 2013, there were some information coming that carbon sink saturation is approaching in European forest biomass. So that was first compilation of the trends, of the recent trends in European managed forests, let's say. And that trend reported in 2013 was shown still rather positive, because the situation in carbon sink is actually still more negative. Let me jump to the situation in the Czech Republic. This period shows briefly the period of my life. You know, I'm almost 60, and this is the period of slightly more than 60 years, since 61, well, about 60 years, yes. You can see that the climate change really takes place. This is pretty convincing information on temperature development in Central European region. Temperature increased by 2%. So most of you are biologically educated. You may imagine how much it may mean for ecosystems in terms of, climatic ecological optimum. So, and look specifically here, recent 5 years, we got really high temperatures combined with rather dry spells, and actually prolonged drought period, not seen in the country for at least 500 years. So pretty extreme situation, which resulted in a terrible situation in Czech forestry. We got really historically extreme large decline of forests due to drought-induced bark beetle calamity. And the effect of that calamity is seen on that picture here. Here I plotted harvest volume in the Czech Republic. This is the total volume divided in the part that is called salvage logging, which is the kind of mandatory logging that must be made by foresters when they do sanitary logging, when they have to deal with calamities. And then this is the planned logging, planned part of forestry. So you can see that we reached about 36 million cubic meters per year in 2020, which was the most extreme year. This is about 200% of what you harvested during 5 years of your ice storm calamity in Slovenia. So it's really terrible. It's extreme. Fortunately, last week I got the information about the harvest in 2021, and we go already to the 30 million level. So that will be probably the maximum reached in the country. So in terms of effect on emissions, it looks like that. The sector that used to be offsetting emissions turned to be releasing emissions. And this is really, now we are the prime country in Europe in terms of emissions from the LULUCF sector. There is no other country that emits that much as Czech Republic. And you can see that most of that is due to forest land and the calamity, bark beetle calamity, and the extremely large harvest in forestry. Partly it's helped by harvested wood products, because more products, more wood makes the larger offset, but it's not that much. So the total is about 13 megatons of CO2 equivalent. Here you can see the Czech greenhouse gas inventory data in total. Now in 2020 we reached the level of 126 megatons, and you can see that the agriculture represents about 6% during that period. Forestry used to offset about 6% when there was no calamity like that, and just these three extreme recent reported years since 2018 and 2020 resulted in an emission contribution from forestry up to the level that it contributes 10% plus to the total emissions. So that's the forestry in Czech Republic nowadays. So the question is, of course, if Czech Republic is so extremely bad, what about the neighboring countries? That they also must be hit, So what about Poland and Germany and Austria and Slovenia maybe? So I did for you a brief comparison of how emissions look like when they are converted to per hectare emissions from the forestry sector. So I included forestry offsets or emissions, including harvested wood products part, and divided by forest area, and got this kind of picture where you can distinguish your country, Slovenia, here. That reported emissions for 5 years following the extreme ice storm that you had, and then sanitary logging following thereafter, but you managed to deal with that situation after 5 years, so you report sink again. Czech Republic, which is that line, that orange line here, is clearly going upwards, so we have the extreme emissions per hectare, of course. And then the question I have, what about the neighboring countries? So look on Germany, Germany, it's very strange that how come that Germany is first so effective in terms of offsetting much more emissions per hectare than all the other good forestry countries. That's a question for, if I look in this, I would look closely how they actually account it, how they calculated these numbers, because it's really strange. Then we have Poland. But what I wanted to say, also Germany reports declining thing, and also Poland reports declining thing, because they also had part of the drought problems there. Peculiar situation with Austria, almost constant. Do you know why? Because their accounting is so rigid. They just have projection of, growth and emissions for 10 years, and they wait until the new cycle of national forest inventory will be available, and then they will recalculate these numbers again. So these numbers will, in hopefully next submission, fluctuate again. So they will change these numbers, so it will not be straight line like this, because that's not almost possible to do with forestry emission inventory like that. But that's the situation. So partly declining thing also in other countries, but Czech Republic being clearly the leader in this set of countries. Here I recall the situation in Slovenia again, that you had the recovery of severe ice storm here that you managed. Slovenia is for many countries a very good example of modern forestry that many countries want to be. So this is your forestry is actually exemplary in many ways. Well, let me jump to forestry priorities when we consider this situation as I outlined. This is part of the leaflet on LULUCF regulation that the European Commission released, and I like that because it actually shows several issues that LULUCF and forestry must deal with. And the first is improve the resilience of forests to climate change. That's the goal number one. Then restore degraded ecosystem. Then care about hosting biodiversity, improve biodiversity in our ecosystem. And then on fourth place, increase carbon stored in soil and forest. And then there is increased use of long-lasting wood and bioproducts. I like that because this is basically how we should think about the sector, because adaptation is the first thing we have to think about when we outline forestry strategy. Restoration of degraded ecosystems, second, biodiversity, and then when we address the first three, we can calculate how much carbon offset there will be in the forest, together with wood products. So, based on that, actually, there is just one slide on adaptation strategy that we propose currently for the Czech Forest State Company, the major forest operator in the country that manages 50% of our forest. What we should do is care about adapting forests so that species and structurally rich forests will be created, well suited to changing environmental conditions. So something like you already have on many instances in forestry. So individual, not clear-cut system, but selection system. Diversity of forest management approaches, avoiding clear cuts. This you can see on many instances in the Czech Republic. You can imagine that replanting these areas will be very difficult because of extended drought, impossibility to use natural regeneration, all kinds of problems. So we should avoid clear-cut systems that result in this kind of terrible situation. We should care about adequate game management. This is very important condition to allow natural regeneration in forest. There is too much game in the forest, not dealt with, it's overgrazed, so unless you do not fence, you have basically no chance to apply natural regeneration on these areas. Preserving and increasing biodiversity, that's clear. And finally, improving water retention capacity and efficient use of water in forests. So there is a lot of things that you can do to improve water retention in forest that is precondition to have really stable ecosystems. So I'm going to my summary. Adaptation of forest and forestry is number one imperative today. That's the key issues that we should deal with. Secondly, I mentioned that there are more important functions than offsetting CO2. I showed you, even EU politics with new forest strategy and biodiversity strategy acknowledges that. The carbon is just on maybe fourth place. And then it implies that optimal carbon fixation strategy implies long-term adaptation, smart use of harvested wood products, and care of soil health. My final slide, I asked you at the beginning, will the forestry sector support or complicate meeting the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets? So you have seen a couple of slides, you have seen trends, so you can make your own mind what you think, whether will we meet those minus 310 megatons offset in the LULUCF sector or not. We don't need to answer this question, but what I want to say that we should remain optimistic, because it's very good to have ambitious target, work for that, and then we see, maybe not meeting the commitment of 310 megatons in 2030 will put more pressure to other sectors like energy sectors to do better job. Thank you.